Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. Today, we'll be talking about how to build your own connector, right? How to connect your devices or sensors to TagoIO. Okay, so before we start, please feel free to present yourself on our chat. And if you have any questions, we have just opened our Q&A that is located above the chat. There, you can ask your questions. And for those who don't know me, my name is Marcelo. I am TagoIO content editor, and with me today I have Vitor Lima, one of our developers. Right? So, oops. Without further ado, please, Vitor.
Hello, everyone. So I am Vitor Lima here, and I'll be talking about connectors on TagoIO. And what is a connector actually? So you define your connector when you first create your device, and it allows for categorization and identification of the devices in your profile. The connector will include configuration parameters and payload parsers for any device created under this connector, and it actually helps you to quickly update all the devices by just updating your connector. Here I have the device data input flow, and I want to explain this diagram here quickly so we can understand where exactly the connector is operating when you are sending data to TagIO. And actually the connector, um, aside from other good thing that you have like updating the connector and applying these updates to your devices. The most important s- feature it has is a control over your payload parser. If you don't know what is the payload parser, I do recommend you checking the training session on TagoIO. It covers payload parser very deeply and on what it is and how you can use it. And payload parser is actually a JavaScript code that you use to decode information sent by your devices or from external APIs. So let me go quickly here about this diagram. So first thing you have is actually sending payloads or JSON, whatever you'll be sending to your devices at TagWio. And usually you choose between two options. That is using the device token through a HTTPS protocol or MQTT, or otherwise you will be using some LoRaWAN or satellite using the authorization method integration. And what actually happens at TagoIO when you first receive your data is it goes to a network. And network is another feature inside your profile, which you can create and work with if you want to, which has the first payload parser that will be analyzing the data that was sent by to your devices. And usually the network has the job to normalizing the data, which means converting the data from for example, if you send a CSV or a buffer or something like that to TagoIO, the network will understand this buffer and give you a result in a JSON format with variable, value, etc. And it normalizes this information and pass through to the connectors. So your connector runs right after the network, and it includes only payload parser regarding um, information about this specific device type. So some examples from a connector is a Dragino, the LNX or Netvox device models. And one example is for LoRaWAN devices, it will usually receive a payload and a port, and will decode this payload and port to human readable values. So next thing on the data input flow is it goes to the device's payload parser, and the device payload parser is very unique to that specific device. If you want to perform some kind of operation on the data that is being stored, and it will not apply to multiple devices. So if you create a payload parser in the device step, it means if later on you want to add a new device, you need to copy the payload parser and paste to that device. And if you need to update this payload parser for some reason, it just start to get very messy with different devices that you need to update to make sure all of them has the same version of the code. So usually you don't want to have a payload parser in your device. You want to have a connector. So that's why this is what I will be explaining in this webinar. So after that, the data is stored in in your buckets and is ready to be used on the dashboards or being accessed through the API. So just getting a little bit deeper on the network and connectors. So both the network and connector represents the parsing steps you have when sending data to Tago, and starting with the network, which identifies your device and normalize the data from its source, and ensure that the data can be understood to all connectors. It directly serves the connector with the outputs of the network, and the connector can then capture specific parts of this data, such as payload and port, as I mentioned, and decode it to a human readable format. Another great thing you have about connector is that if you are a hardware uh, developer, for example, and you are developing sensors for the market, you can actually go to TagoIO, create your connector, and make it public. So that way, anyone that builds your sensor can actually go to TagoIO and find your sensor in or when creating a device and has all the payload parser and maybe some configuration parameter options already set for them to just start using the sensor. Now I want to do some live example here. So I'll share my screen. Okay, so here I am in my TagoIO account and I am inside a device. And what usually happens when new users come to TagoIO is there they go to the devices, they don't have any device here. They press add a device, and first thing they see is actually some connectors and the networks. So on the sidebar here, I have all the public networks that TagoIO makes available. And under the network, when I click here on the TTN, for example, I have all the connectors. So each one of these boxes is actually a connector. It has the payload parser and configuration parameters related to this specific device. On the top here, I have my connectors, and it will show this orange uh, line here on the top, and this lock icon here that tells me these as are actually private connectors, so it's only available for my profile here. Other users cannot see these connectors or using their account. So if you have a brand new sensor that TagoIO do not support, what you actually will do is to find a network that you can use. So for example, if you have a LoRaWAN under Ethernet, you will be using this custom Ethernet and create your device. And the next step would be, once you have the device created, to write your payload parser, because usually devices send data in a different format, or you need to decode payload and port, as it is done in this case. and test with a single device and make it work. So once you do that, um, what I advise you to do is to create your own connector. For this specific device, you just made the payload parser for. So what I can do here is to copy my payload parser that I created for this device here, go to the top under the integrations, and here I can see my connectors and my networks, and I can press here to add the connector. I can give it a name, and I can choose which networks I want this connector to work for. So usually, if you are doing a LoRaWAN connector, for example, you can assume safely that your connector will actually work for any LoRaWAN, even the ones you didn't test or you are not sure if your sensor are supported under that network, because TagoIO network for LoRaWAN will do all the job to make sure you will receive payload and port in the same format, and your payload parser will actually work if data is received from any of these networks. But of course, if you want, for example, to choose here MQTT, for example, we don't make there is no guarantee it will work for MQTT if you don't take your time in the code testing with MQTT and making the adjustments to work with both kind of networks. So in this case, I'll leave only the LoRaWAN ones check, and I'll create my connector. So here I do have some options to enter a description, and you can hover the mouse here on this lamp to see exactly where this information will show up. Same thing about the device image. We can enter also under documentation here some description that show when you are first installing your device. We can also have a complexion text that is a message that shows up after the device is created, and also a device annotation that shows in the devices page when user wants to check its devices. Another option here is device parameters. So we can have some parameters. These are all predefined configuration parameters you can set up for this connector, and it will show up for the user. And you can select here if it's height, or if the user don't have the option to change it. Advanced, so it will display in the advanced section of the device or in the my section, which is the first page the user see when creating the device. And if you are already familiar with the parameters, you can have this parameter, you can get the value of these parameters in your payload parser. So if you have some dynamic information that you need the user to input, some example is for water level, maybe you need to know what is the maximum water level. So you can output some percentage, for example, or battery level. So this kind of information you can create a field here and have it display for the user when they are creating their devices. And next one, which is the most important, is the payload parser. So I did copy, oh, I need to copy again. Let me go to my device here quickly. Payload parser, I can copy this and paste here. So now I have a connector with a payload parser that will work for any device created under this connector. Next thing would be for me here, go to the devices page, add the device, and under my connectors here, I can see the connector I just created. So since I selected all the networks, I have the option to choose which network I want to create my devices for. And it will show data storage type, the data retention, which is basic for any device. And in this case, it shows device UI because I selected a LoRa one network. So this is information that the network requires. So different networks can have different requirements here. So I want to give you some demonstrations on some other uh, things you can do with a connector. So talking about device parameters, I can have here water level, for example, as an input for the user. I can put the default value of 100, 1000, and I can have an alias here, which is the name of this parameter that will show up for the user when they see this field. I can also select the parameter type. So it can be a drop down, a switch value, a number, or a text. Let's put number and rewrite the default value here. And you can notice it's under the main section here. So let's press save. And when I try to create my device now, let's just do a refresh on the page. I do have the option to select the water level for this device here. So if I want to change to advanced display section, what will actually happen is that it show in under the advanced box here, and I can hide this. So in this case, alias is not useful anymore, and the user will not have the option to change this parameter, but the parameter will be there when the device is created. So science connectors also work as a categorization. If I go here to, let me create this device first, one day, and put a random UI here, finish. If I go to my device, I can see here under I think I disabled the connector. Under the connector column, which connector I'm using. So this also works as some identifier for you to identify your devices. So another thing we can do here, uh, let me create a new connector, is depending on your application, you can use this to have more identification on your devices. So for example, if I am creating some integration with Google, for example, or some other service, I can enter a Google as the name of this connector. And what you actually want to select for database for the network is storage. So storage automatically set the type of the bucket as mutable. And I can create this connector. And now if I create any device using Google, it will be identified by its connector and automatically set as a mutable device every time you want to create this device here. So you can use this way. You also have the ID of this connector, so you can filter using the API by its connector. And this ID, of course, is required if you plan to create devices using the API. So you need to have this ID on the API calls as well. I think I covered everything regarding what you can do with connectors. Is very basic and quickly to do, and it can have many uses. I do recommend setting up some connectors if you have the option. I usually see people using default storage, for example. Let me find the storage here. Default database connector. Of course, there is no problem doing that. You can change later on your devices if you have done that. But usually, having your own connector gives you control over the payload parser, which is something that in the future you might need to use. So setting this up first would be will save you a lot of time in the future. Okay, so that's it under the connector. Can we move to the Q&A, Marcelo? Marcelo, are you there? I cannot hear.
Yes, I am. Right. So thank you very much, Victor. Right. It was amazing to see how we can do it and how we can and how easy it is, right, to connect our devices. And for today, we actually don't have any questions, right? So before we end, I would like to remind you guys that we are constantly having webinars, and you can follow them in our events page, subscribe to our newsletter so you never miss one of them, and you always know what is happening on the IoT world, right? If you don't have a TagoIO account, it's pretty easy to create one and it's free. Look at that. And you can also ask for one-on-one talk. Right, so anyway, for today that was it, guys. Goodbye.
Goodbye.